Hey, what's up guys? So in this video, let's take a look at all of the new and recently updated radar detectors. Now, the last time I did this video was back in October, and since then we've had some new radar detectors get released. We've had a lot of updates to existing radar detectors. Some of the updates good, others not so much. We've sadly had a radar detector company which has gone out of business. We've got some updates to laser jammers. We've got radar detector test results to go over. And so there's quite a bit of stuff to discuss here. And so for that reason, down in the video description, you're going to find links to everything that I talk about, whether it's links to where you can purchase the different detectors that I go over here in this video, where you can find the different firmware updates, the discussion about the updates, etc. So down in the description, you'll find all the information that we need as we start going into everything here in this video. And so with that said, let's just go ahead and dive right into it. Now starting off, let's begin here first with Escort. There's been a lot of questions about what's the status with their detectors. Now Escort's released a series of firmware updates, like for the Redline 360C we've had firmware 1.13, 1.14, 1.15, or 1.6 depending on which version of the Redline that you have. But basically Escort's been working to improve the performance, the aero behavior, etc. of the detectors. Unfortunately, though, we've been seeing some issues with those detectors. We've had some performance-related issues as far as response time. A lot of people have reported that with the latest update, their arrows are no longer working properly. So there's been a variety of different updates, or well, issues with these updates. Even like their Escort Live, their Drive Smarter cloud functionality, there's issues with that is broken as well. It seems like it may be due to AT&T or Verizon, but the cloud functionality is broken yet again over Wi-Fi. Now, as far as the detector updates, though, we're all just kind of still waiting on Escort to fix the issues and release an update. I've got my radar guns back from calibration and certification and stuff, and so once the detector is updated, I'll be able to retest and everything, and hopefully Escort has finally addressed these issues. As far as the international version of the detectors, the latest version of the Redline is 1.9 or 1.6. And while there's been some changes and improvements with the latest version here, again, we're seeing some degraded performance with the latest version of the Redline 360C International as well. Escort has been working on the response time and the blind spot filtering, and so I don't know if some of that had some unwanted kind of adverse consequences, but either way, again, we're all just kind of waiting for Escort to like fully address these issues, and then maybe when the next update comes out, we'll all go out and retest, and hopefully they fix those issues. Now, there's been similar updates released for some of Escort's other blackfin detectors, like the Max 360 Mark II or the Max 360C Mark II. And the same issues that we've been seeing on the Redline should also apply to the Max series detectors as well. Now, Escort's also released some accessories for their detectors recently as well. Different power cable options. I've actually done a series of videos going over these recently. If you'd like to take a look, I'll link to those down in the description too. But basically, they've released a USB Type-C power cable in case maybe your car doesn't have like a cigarette lighter power cable, for example. You can use a USB power cable. And they've also released an alternative hardwire power cable option. So if you want to maybe avoid tapping into the car's fuse box, which can be a little bit tricky for some people, there's now an option to just plug directly into the OBD2 port instead. It's kind of similar to what Valentine has done with Savvy, but now Escort has a solution here as well. And speaking of Valentine, they released an update back in December, and the latest version of the V1 Gen 2 is now 4.1036. And this has added some new features like full support for their new tech display, for example. We now have an auto mute feature similar to other detectors to where the detector can alert at full volume and then drop the volume after 3 seconds. But there's also an option for like a more advanced version to where if maybe the signal suddenly, well, kind of over time ramps back up and gets really strong, the detector can actually unmute to let you know that like, hey, the signal that I've been muting, it might be more of a threat, so you might want to pay attention. So I like that they've put a little bit more kind of like sophistication into their auto mute feature here as well. And there's also been some tweaks made to the detector's volume adjustments, as well as to the more stealthy kind of resting display option on the detector's display itself. And overall, people seem to be pretty happy with the latest update here in the V1 Gen 2. The BSM filtering, for example, is pretty effective. It's not reliant on the K-blocks the way Uniden is depending on, for example, and overall, people seem to be really liking the V1, myself included. I've actually been kind of like narrowing down my favorite detectors to like the V1 Gen 2 and some of the like flagship Unidens, like the R8, R8W, R9W. And so overall, I've been really liking kind of like how the V1 has been evolving and progressing. And speaking of Uniden, let's take a look at them next. So they've just released 2 new detectors called the R4W and the R8W. Same idea as the original R4 and R8, same features and performance and everything. The only difference is they've now added Wi-Fi in the detectors as well. So the detectors now have the ability to go out over the air and wirelessly check for updates for both the firmware and for the red light camera GPS database. It's 2.4 gigahertz only. I really wish they would have added 5 gigahertz support as well, the way Escort is done. And they don't have all the same features over Wi-Fi that you get with the Escort detectors. And there are some UI improvements I'd like to see with how they notify you of updates and how the updates are actually applied to the detector. But overall, I really like this as basically a way to make it more convenient to get the detectors updated without being reliant on the USB port, which can be problematic for people compared to maybe something that's a little bit easier and more automated doing it over Wi-Fi. And then as far as firmware updates for the different detectors, we'll start here first with the R8. We've had a number of different firmware versions. There's been 1.34, 1.35, and now the latest version, which is 1.36. A variety of different updates and improvements. One of the biggest ones, I think, is the introduction of a bunch of additional K-blocks. So for example, if you get a lot of blind spot falses, there's now some additional K-blocks that you can build in to deal with like Mazda CX-5s or other Hondas, Acuras, Jeeps, etc. Additionally, Uniden's also been making some improvements to the auto lockout algorithm here as well, so the detector can do a better job of actually recognizing signals that you've passed multiple times and go ahead and triggering the auto lockout so that it mutes those signals for you in the future next time you come by. And then the R8W, the latest version of that is going to be 1.28, and it's again kind of got the same updates that the R8 does, just kind of like bringing the Wi-Fi version up in line as well. And then as far as the R4 series, they've had a variety of different firmware updates that basically adds all the same functionality that we've had for the R8 series, like the additional K-blocks, auto lockout improvements as well. The latest version of the R4 is now 1.37, and the R4W has now been updated to 1.15. And then something else to quickly talk about is the introduction of the R4 Plus. There's actually been some confusion about what this is and what the differences are. It's basically a Sam's Club exclusive for the R4 that's exactly the same thing as the R4, just with another power cable in the box. So same detector, same features, same performance, same everything, just instead of one power cable, it's got two. Now, there's been some confusion about this because they're like, well, this is the R4 Plus. It's got to be a better detector. There's got to be some improvements here. But basically what it seems to be happened is Sam's Club used to sell the R4 as well, I think at like $289 or so. It was a really good deal. It was cheaper than what you would find on Amazon or Uniden's website or whatever else. And I guess they just kind of wanted to bring up the price for everybody to make it more similar across the board. And so they've discontinued the R4 at Sam's Club, or well, I guess Sam's Club no longer carries it. And now they carry the R4 Plus, and the price is now more in line with what we see on like Amazon, for example. Though if you go to buy it at Sam's Club, you do get the benefit of getting a second cigarette lighter power cable. So there is a bit of a difference. And so that's what the Plus is in the R4 Plus. Next, moving on to the R7. This has been updated now to version 1.52. And again, it just brings in line a lot of the same updates that we've had for like the R4 and the R8. Now that said, the detector does still lack some features and functionality. For example, there's no Bluetooth available here in the R7. Just, well, it's a hardware limitation, right? That's only in like the R4 and the R8 series. And also there's no automatic sensitivity adjustments, for example. That could be added with like a firmware update, but they're keeping that exclusive to like the R4 and the R8 to kind of separate them. But that said, if you get the international version of the R7, it's a third-party paid firmware. For the R7, it can actually add some of these features like the automatic sensitivity adjustments, and the way it's implemented there, it's actually better than the way that Uniden has kind of done it in their detectors. Now, the latest version of the international R7 firmware is 1.59. And I like a lot of the features that it has. So for example, it's got the K-blocks like we've had for the R4 and the R8. They've actually had it for quite a while. Uniden has since added it to the R7, but we've had it for a while on the international firmware. There's also some things like not only improved automatic GPS lockout capabilities, but also auto unlock capabilities. If you pass a signal that's no longer present, it does a better job of actually unlocking those signals for you. And I've been running 1.59 on the R7 in one of my cars for quite a while now as like the main detector in that car, and I'm actually really happy with it. Now, there's also a new version of the firmware. It's now 1.60, but that's really exclusive just for like New Zealand drivers. It's got some bug fixes and some New Zealand specific features, but otherwise, if you're driving around like here in North America, for example, 1.59 is still the latest and greatest version, and it continues to do a great job. Next, Uniden has released the R9W. It's the updated version of their custom installed radar detector, the R9. Again, same exact thing. It's just the CPU now has Wi-Fi built in, 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi, to give you those over-the-air updates for your firmware updates and your red light camera and speed camera GPS database. The R9 is effectively being discontinued and replaced here now with the R9W. To pick that up, you'd have to go find a local dealer or an installer. They're not making it available online the way they used to with the R9. And so you have to go find an installer to actually purchase the system from, and they can help you with the installation as well. Now, this can be easier said than done. There's people who are having issues being able to find somebody who will sell them a system in the first place. but this is the approach that Uniden is taking with only selling locally and no longer selling online. Now, interestingly, we're also finding, talking with some of the installers, they're making the R9W available radar only. So if you want to buy it with like the front radar detector only, you could do that. That retails for $13.49. And then if you'd like to add the rear radar detector antenna as well to give you the directional arrows, that's going to retail for an additional $6.99, bringing you up to $20.49. And then as far as Uniden's add-on laser jammers to plug into like the R4 and R8 series, it looks like those are starting to become available as well. Again, unfortunately not available online for purchase. You're going to have to go through a local dealer. Has to be a dealer who actually does the installations though. Price-wise, it retails for $13.75 for a set of triples up front. And then if you want to buy some additional laser jammer heads to maybe get like rear protection as well, that's going to be an additional $3.75 per laser jammer head. And it's currently compatible with both the R4W and the R8W, though the settings and menu options for the laser jammer functionality are not actually going to show up in the detector until you plug in like the laser brains, the main box, into the side of the detector. I find trying the same thing with the R4 and the R8, those same settings don't show up yet, but because Uniden has said they're going to bring the same capability over to the non-Wi-Fi versions of the detectors, I'm expecting a future firmware update is going to re-enable the functionality for the laser jammers, a lot like we had with some of the older firmware versions for the R4 and the R8 that Uniden has kind of like since pulled the laser jammer functionality. I'm assuming that in future firmware updates, we're going to get that feature re-enabled here as well. And then as far as Uniden, I gotta admit, I've kind of been somewhat unhappy with some of their decisions as of late. It seems like they're basically kind of screwing over some of their dealers, like dealers who's helped the company get to where they are today, who Uniden wouldn't be in the position they are without some of these dealers kind of getting them there. And Uniden is like, yeah, we're no longer going to sell to you. We just want to sell to other people instead. And I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of stuff here that we could get into, but basically like for the laser jammers and the R9W, they're now only selling to dealers who can do the installation. They don't want to sell to people who are going to be selling it online, for example. So now it's a lot harder for people who want to purchase the systems to go out and obtain these systems. They're also not going to be working with any third-party developers. And so for you guys who are like, hey, open APIs are awesome, look what Valentine did and look how amazing it's been for them, Uniden's like, yeah, we're not going to work with any developers. And so all the developers have to basically reverse engineer the Bluetooth communication protocol to be able to like work with their detectors. And so there's some limitations as far as the capabilities with what the app developers are capable of. As far as what we've been seeing on some of the beta testing side and the communication, like there's just a lot of stuff to where it seems like Uniden as a company is becoming less collaborative now than they were before. And I feel like that was a big part of what helped the company grow. So I'm a little bit concerned now as far as some of the choices and decisions that I've been seeing Uniden make. I've mentioned this to them, I've kind of gone over some of this, but I hope that maybe they change their minds on how they're approaching things, but that's their decision to make. Ultimately, that's their company. It's their decision. And then on the app side, Uniden has since released their own new app for their Bluetooth-capable detectors. It's called RTAC. It's available for Android and iOS. It's a pretty simple and basic app, basically letting you do things like, see the alerts from your radar detector. You can change some of the settings in your detector. You can see if a firmware update is available, etc. That said, you can't actually update your detectors over Bluetooth the way you can do with the Valentine, the Radenso DS1, the NetRadar DSP, etc. It just notifies you if an update is available. Additionally, if you've got a detector that has Wi-Fi built in, so like R4W, R8W, or R9W, it'll allow you to actually kind of create the Wi-Fi pairing so that you can update your detector wirelessly over the air. And that's probably, I think, one of the biggest benefits of running their app. It's kind of like doing that initial pairing with Wi-Fi if you have a Wi-Fi capable detector. Or if you have any one of the detectors with Bluetooth, you can adjust some of the settings. Some of the third-party apps will allow you to adjust a few of the settings as well, but RTAC will allow you to adjust pretty much all of the settings. So that's, I guess, maybe the biggest benefit of their app is just adjusting settings and setting up the Wi-Fi initially. But otherwise, day-to-day, I find the third-party apps are actually way better. There's a lot more useful features. They can add some additional false alert filtering capabilities. They can log your alerts as you're driving around, etc. And so personally, I would really only use RTAC for maybe adjusting settings initially or setting up Wi-Fi initially, but otherwise day to day, the third-party apps for both Android and iOS, I think, are quite a bit better here than what Uniden is offering. And then lastly from Uniden, let's talk about their update software. So they've released now new update software for both Windows and for Mac. The latest version on Windows is 2.22, and on Mac we now have version 2.15. And the big news here with 2.15 is the fact that, well, it now works again properly for most of Uniden's radar detectors, so now we can resume updating our detectors over USB. So Awesome, that's a big deal. That said, there's still problems that remain. So for example, due to some of the kind of like security stuff on Macs, there's a lot of hoops you got to jump through. It will a lot of times get flagged as like malware, for example. The first time I tried to update, it wouldn't work properly and I had to try again. So for that reason, if you're updating on Mac, they have a walkthrough on their website that goes over how to actually do it, to go through and, you know, enable things to say like, hey, this isn't malware. How do you approve stuff? So definitely take a look at that. I'll link to that in the video description as well. It's actually right on Uniden's update page, right alongside where you go to download the latest Mac software as well. So definitely take a look at that if you're updating on the Mac. Additionally, people are still reporting some issues with compatibility with a variety of different detectors. It doesn't seem to work yet with some of their Wi-Fi detectors like the R4W and R8W. So for that reason, if you're updating those ones, you'll want to stick to doing it over Wi-Fi. It's not supported yet on Mac over USB. So we finally have a much needed update for the Mac update software. So it works now with most of their detectors, but Uniden's update software continues to be a problem. I don't know why this is such an issue, and it just continues to be. Like, I've done update videos multiple times on like how to update Uniden detectors, and there's new software, and maybe I need to do it again. But like, if you have issues, I did, most people do, just check out the tutorial on their website instead. Next, moving on to Radenso. We've got a firmware update for the DS1. It's now been updated to 1.18. Very minor update. It just changes some of the default settings if you've got it set up for the Australia or New Zealand driving mode, kind of the default settings the detector comes pre-programmed with. Otherwise, it's still all the same stuff. And then Radenso has also released some updated Mac software here as well. It's also made by Atawave, by Uniden. So you're going to run into some of the same update issues here as well with drivers or software and compatibility and Mac security stuff that you have to like authorize and stuff. So for that, definitely take a look at Radenso's walkthrough and tutorial on their Mac software as well. Next, moving on to Stinger, they've released a new firmware update. It's now 8.0.4, up from like the 7 V7 firmware. A bunch of different updates and improvements here. Been driving around with it. Overall, seems to be performing pretty well. The blind spot filtering, for example, is pretty effective here. Not perfect, but pretty good. They've made some improvements to like the UI here, for example. And there's also been some bug fixes introduced as well. On the UI side, there's still some additional improvements I would love to see. So like, for example, the automatic display brightness doesn't actually work properly. And there's not an easy way to manually adjust the display brightness. You have to like dig in through the menus and stuff. Additionally, if you want to like turn up the K-band filtering to cut down on some of the false alerts, that also reduces the sensitivity of the detector. And because K-band and Ka-band are tied together, there's no way to like just up the filtering on K-band without affecting Ka. If you want maybe like improved blind spot filtering, it's also going to then reduce the sensitivity and the performance of both K and Ka-band. So there's stuff that I would love to see them like further improve upon and tweak, especially considering the price point of the Stinger. But with this latest update, overall it seems to be working pretty well in terms of blind spot filtering and lockouts and all that kind of stuff. Over the summer, I'd like to go and do maybe like a full, long range radar detector shootout with all the different custom installed radar detectors, maybe put them head to head. With some of the windshield mounts and stuff, but that is still to come. It's not, I guess, maybe one of the reasons why I would choose one of the top-end detectors. They all perform really well. They all give long range. That's not really a reason to choose one over the other, but that's definitely something as the weather gets nicer, I'd like to go out and do. Next, shifting gears, let's take a look at Whistler. Now, Whistler sadly looks like they've actually gone out of business. Now, according to BRD, it looks like the manufacturer that produced their inventory went bankrupt and went out of business. Additionally, their radar detectors, like the Titan, for example, that's like their new flagship detector, wasn't unfortunately really that competitive. They tended to focus on like more of the lower end, more affordable detectors, right? And then they decided with their latest detector to compete with, your Escort Max 4s, your Radenso DS1, the Uniden R3 and R4, like your higher end, higher performance detectors. And the Titan was the one that competes with that. Unfortunately, though, still wasn't quite able to be fully competitive against those detectors. And so for that reason, I would still be recommending the competition over the Whistler, despite the fact that the Whistler Titan was a big improvement compared to their other detectors like the CR97, 93, the previous ones. Now, good news, it actually looks like Whistler is going to be coming back to life. While I was sitting here editing this video, it looks like their website is now back up online and we're starting to get some more information about what's going on. It looks like they wound up selling off their assets to another company, a new company, who's basically going to be taking over for Whistler. All this information is super new. It's literally happening as we speak, like literally as I'm editing this video. So let's hop on the computer real quick and take a look as far as what's going on. Now, a special shout out to the folks over on the radio reference forums who posted about this earlier today and did a little bit of digging and sharing some helpful information, as well as to Mike OX Long on the radar detector forums on RDF for posting about this here as well. Now, the idea is if you go take a look, Whistler's website is now back up. It was actually down recently and nothing was loading. But as you can see, it says we are back. Now, if you go up the top here, it says learn about Whistler. There's some interesting things. So Whistler's history, it says Whistler was, sadly, past tense, was an electronics company based out of Arkansas. Some information about GRE when they started working with some scanners and whatnot. But the main thing is the fact right here. It says the Whistler Group legacy lives on through Goliad Products LLC. They've acquired the assets of the Whistler Group in January of 2025. So last month, they acquired everything, and now it looks like they're bringing everything back up. Now, if you take a look at their product lines, they currently only have some scanners listed. There's no radar detectors listed yet. However, if you do go over to like the page, if you know the URL for it, it does still show up here, which is good to see. Now, as far as who this company is, Goliad Products, it seems to be a pretty new company based out of Ohio. They were actually formed in December of 2024, so a newer company. We're not sure who this is, what their role is going to be, what they're going to do for Whistler, what products they're going to relaunch, if there's going to be any new development, new products. All that stuff, of course, remains to be seen, but it's definitely good to see that, well, the company's at least coming back to life. It's great to have competition, even if maybe it's not always the greatest products on the radar detector side, but I love having a variety of different options at different price points in different tiers. If we take a look on the Amazon page, I tried searching here for a Whistler Titan, but nothing is showing up here yet. I tried going to the old Amazon listing. You can see it says that it's currently unavailable. It's not showing up in search. Don't know when or if it's going to be back in stock, but because of the fact that, well, it's showing up on Whistler's website, can we buy it if we try? Quantity 1, maybe the cart here. There we go. Can I check out? Great. Okay, so it looks like we do have the option here to check out. So it looks like this stuff, again, is slowly starting to come back to life, and we'll have to kind of see what Goliad Products decides to do here as far as Whistler and their lineup of detectors, as well as whether or not they still have the same people like Mike Batten on board, who up to this point has been responsible for developing Whistler's radar detectors. And then on a related note, I've also seen some weird stuff going on online with K40 as well. Now, they've got their products listed here online, like their custom installed Platinum 360 and 200, their windshield mount Platinum 100, their laser jammers. They're all kind of like overpriced underperformers. It's traditionally what we see here with all the different K40 products. Now, what's weird, though, is if you take a look, a lot of their social media stuff is down. So like their Instagram page, for example, here, this is now taken offline. It's like they deleted their account or something. Same thing here with Facebook too, so it's not a one-off. It looks like maybe, been deleted here as well, potentially. I took a look at their Twitter page, and this one, I mean, their last post was back in 2020, so like 5 years ago, so they haven't been posting here anyways. So it seems like a lot of their social media stuff is down as well. I did take a look as far as like their Amazon page. They still have $700. They still have a lot of their stuff like listed online. They still got some in stock. So we'll kind of have to like keep an eye on it to kind of see like what is going to be happening moving forward. Word on the street is that K40 is going out of business, but we do need to wait and see whether or not the rumor is true. Next, moving on to laser, the latest update for the AntiLaser Priority is firmware version 6.1.5, and it basically adds some bug fixes for the latest Hardware 6 CPUs. Additionally, there's also another update expected for both Hardware 4 and Hardware 6 CPUs if you're using the TX Black heads. And while this update hasn't been released yet, it should help to improve the performance of the jammer if you're using those TX Black heads. The guys down in Florida recently tested here with this latest firmware, and again, they're still finding that they're getting some punch-throughs against the Dragon Eye. It's the same stuff that they saw in the Tennessee testing, where essentially with older firmware, the ALP could go jam to gun and jam from gun against the Dragon Eye, but with this latest firmware, the Dragon Eye is actually getting some nasty punch-throughs against the ALP, and sometimes even goes IPT, instant punch-through. And so we're all eagerly awaiting the next update, which is currently still in testing, which should help us restore the ALP's jamming capabilities. As far as Uniden's add-on jammers, we talked about that back in like the radar detector section, but yes, it looks like Uniden is now starting to roll out through some of their local dealers and installers their add-on jammers for like the R4, R8, R4W, R8W. So if you'd like to pick those up, you could get in touch with a local dealer and purchase them locally. And then finally, let's talk about some radar detector testing. Now, DC Fluid was kind of on fire over the holiday season and did a bunch of testing with a variety of different radar detectors. And here's some of the main highlights and takeaways that I found reviewing his test results. Now, he actually did 4 different shootouts, and he found that the results will vary from one day to another, from one course to another, etc. That's totally normal, and I'm glad he did that because, as you can see, like, one test is not going to be representative of every situation, every course, every terrain, etc. So again, it's nice having a lot of data to take a look at. And then when it comes to long distance performance, it was basically all the top tier contenders kind of like up at the top of the pack, which is what you would expect. So like your Uniden R4 and R8 series detectors, also the R4W and R8W, the V1 Gen 2, the Redline 360C, etc. Again, the results would vary from one course to another, from one radar gun to another, one day to another, etc. But those were kind of some of the best performers. We also had some detectors like the Radenso DS1 and the Uniden R7, which couldn't quite keep up with those highest end ones, but also still did very well as well. The R9 and R9W, this was pretty interesting. He found that the antenna height actually did make a big difference, which is not a big surprise, but it was good to see it actually tested here. Now, when he had the antenna mounted down low in the grill, which was like the best place that he could actually install it in his grill, he didn't actually get the best range possible. He was actually getting outperformed by some of the windshield mount detectors. Now that said, I also noticed that on a different day against a different radar gun, the R9 mounted in the same spot managed to edge out the other windshield mount detectors. Next, he tried actually moving it up higher in his grill back behind his grill, but it actually cut the range in half. So that definitely didn't work. He tried mounting it up higher, like actually on the dash, and it performed much better here, much more in line with what he saw with the high-end windshield mount detectors. Similarly, with the rear antenna mounted up high on the bed of his truck, it also performed very well up there. Now, like me, he's found that higher mounted detectors typically get longer range than lower mounted detectors, and it's often due to things like terrain or traffic affecting the radar signal. And he actually did an A/B test with the high mount versus the low mount, and amusingly, he actually found that the low mount outperformed his high mount runs. And it's weird, of course, because this is the opposite of what we traditionally see. Now, he shared some thoughts as to why this could happen. For example, in some of the previous tests, maybe the wet snow and slush could absorb the signal and affect the range. Maybe it was the fact that on this day it was dry and cold, or the fact that it was mounted outside the car with no glass in front of the radar detector. It could be comparing K-band versus Ka-band. And so, as always, the stuff is not as black and white as we would hope. And this is a big part of the reason of why we always give these disclaimers of why your results may vary from one test or condition to another. And so with that said, yeah, I guess that's a run through of like all of the news as far as new detectors, updates, companies going out of business, laser jammer stuff, even testing as well. There's of course more stuff that we can talk about, but these are kind of some of the main highlights and updates to be aware of. And finally, for more information about any of the stuff that I talked about here in this video, for discussion about these updates or improvements or new detectors, or to purchase any of the detectors or download the updates, any of that kind of stuff, there's going to be a big, long list of links down in the video description that you can check out. And so, woo! With that said, thanks so much for watching. Glad to get this video done. Now let's move on to doing some more testing and, of like dash cams and different radar detectors, etc. A lot of stuff that I want to work on, but I'm glad to get this update done of all the stuff that's happened over the past couple months. Thanks again for watching. Hope you guys are all doing great, and I'll see you in the next one.